Hey guys, today's project is sticking with the Halloween theme, and I'm making my interpretation of the Evil Dead cabin. This cabin is pretty notorious in the horror movie world, and I figured it would be a lot of fun to try and make my own version of it and then make a scene to film it in. This is also the very first time that I've ever made the entire exterior of a building. I've only ever done a single wall or something like that. So I'm trying to make out the whole frame with foam board. I designed a little bit of what I thought I'd want in my 3D modeling program on my iPad, and then I just started cutting out the pieces that I needed and gluing them together. I decided so that I'd have more options of how I could light it in the end. I wanted to make the cabin in two parts. This is the first half of the cabin, and then there's an obvious added extension to the back of it in the movie, and so I'm making these in two separate parts, leaving the back of the front part open so that I could add lights to it. And for those wondering, this is actually in 1/24th scale. It's the first time I've done 1/24th scale as well, and it's really because obviously entire buildings are much larger than single rooms like I'm used to. So my plan was to get the structure complete with the foam board and go and prime it, and then start to cut all kinds of little pieces of balsa wood to use as individual planks of wood for the walls, the deck, and the windows and doors. This did take quite a long time because I had to go in and see exactly what length I needed for each wall and each part of the wall, but I like how balsa wood really just has this perfect wood texture because it is real wood, and I like how it's easily stained with different paints and the grain still shows through a little bit. Here I'm starting to frame out the windows with some more balsa wood pieces. I really kept this simple. The cabin itself is pretty simple, and knowing this is the first exterior I've ever done, I wanted to make my job a little easier, and even with that, I was getting crunched for time for this project and had to speed things up a little bit in the end. These pieces are going over the windows like they were boarded up from the inside, like in the movie. So this is the very back of the cabin, and to be honest, I'm not sure you're even going to see this in my finished shots. I don't think I'm going to film it from this angle, but I wanted to at least complete it most of the way so that I had a finished piece. Now here is where this kind of portion of the wall has just been busted through and broken, and so I broke a lot of these pieces of wood at the end and glued them on so that there's going to be this massive hole that has live edge broken pieces on it. Once that was all done, I started priming everything and began the process of painting some individual planks, different shades of brown and orange colors, so that when I started using washes over top of that, there would be some variance, but it wouldn't stick out too much. I used this piece of poster board to individually paint each one with my airbrush, and I really didn't pick out that many. I could have done a lot more to get more variety, but I think it worked. I really like how well the balsa wood takes washes like this, but they do dry pretty faint, so you have to do multiple layers sometimes and build up the effect. And at some point, I think I do use a matte varnish over everything so that it stops seeping into the wood, and then I can really put paint on it that will make a bigger effect. To start to age the wood, I used a gray paint and started dabbing it in places, and then would knock it back with a paper towel so that it wouldn't be too obvious. And I did that with a brown color as well, and maybe even one other color, just to start building up different variances and make it look like it's been aged over time. So for the roofing, it looked like it was a tin roof, and so I decided to make a template and use aluminum foil to make the roof. I'm not going to go into detail of how I made this template and how I'm using it here, but I will be showing all of it in a tutorial on my Patreon this month. So if you like this technique and want to learn how to do it, you can join my Patreon at the video tutorials tier, and you'd also get the tutorials that I've posted on there for the last couple months as well. But as you can see, using the template and pressing the tinfoil over it created this pattern that makes it look like it has the grooves and things like the metal roofing. So I'm just priming it, and then I used a brighter grayish color to go back over that primer to make it look like fresh tin roof. I had read online somewhere that Uhu glue was really great for sticking aluminum foil to things, and since I've never tried it, I decided to pick up some, and it worked really great for this. I will say though, the glue has a very strong smell, and I made sure to use a respirator when I was working with it. I really liked how the aluminum foil ended up looking, and I think it's a great technique to try out. The only downside is obviously the aluminum foil is fragile, but once you glue it down, the parts that are glued seemed really solid. So now I glued some pieces together for a door, and these are window shutters. The front door has some destruction going on, and so I drilled a couple holes through it and used pliers to really rip some of those pieces out, and I liked how the wood underneath was still fresh and it looked like it had just been broken. These are little pieces that I'm rusting up to use as hinges for the door and the window shutters. Time to make the small overhanging porch. I decided to just cut a piece of mat board out and glue that in place, and then I began to add little sticks to use as supports. To begin dirtying up the roof, I started dropping from a brush some of my brown pigment powder and sprayed that with some watered down isopropyl alcohol to kind of set it. So at this point I realized I still needed to make a chimney, and so I took this piece of wood, wrapped it in some tinfoil, and started adding super scopy oven baked clay all around it. After it was done baking, I started adding this texture paste to it to give it a little more of a texture. I didn't feel like trying to do that all with the clay. And this worked out really well as just a layer of texture that I could paint over. I decided to try and paint this fairly quickly. I used this bluish gray color first, then I used a tan color and used some washes on top of those to tie it in and make it kind of just look like a dirty old chimney. Started using pigment powders on different areas of the model now to really start aging it even further, and also used some very watered down paints to just make streaking marks on some of the surfaces like the door and some of the window shutters. The tin roof was really wanting some rust and rusting kind of streaks, so I started doing rust-colored streaks and rust pigment powders in different areas to make it look like it has been there for a little while and is definitely rusting. Now this step really started to transform the piece, and it's again just some dead leaves from my backyard that I ground up in a cheap small coffee grinder, and I'm just spreading that around using some watered down PVA glue to stick it in place. I love how good these little leaves look on this type of scale. And because it's a cabin in the woods, I used some fine green flocking to look like moss and buildup of growth on the roof in areas. So now you get to see how absolutely terrible these giant trees are that I made for the deep background. I used the same sticks from my last video and added some very cheap foliage to it. I also added this dead tree in the front and started putting dirt all over the place. The ground up leaves really worked awesome here as well. Now with everything full of fog, I think we're ready for the final shots. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and subscribe so you can see my next projects, and be sure to check out my Patreon page if you want to see any more from me and my future projects. A huge thank you to all my patrons who do currently support me. It is not cheap to build all these projects, and every little bit helps a ton. I'll see you guys next time.